Hello everyone and welcome to our live stream. Welcome to your opportunity to chat about Formula One. Looking forward to your comments and questions as we look back at the Canadian Grand Prix and ahead to the Austrian Grand Prix, not this weekend, but the following weekend. Sort of Mickey Mouse circuit really, isn't it? Sort of square with a few nice corners in it. Incredible for racing, but not what you call full of demanding corners in the Suzuka sense of the word. But no, that's not what this is all about. This is all about Formula One and our chat and our fondness, love. Yeah, we love Formula One, don't we? So welcome aboard to the live stream. Don't worry about asking a question if you think somebody has already asked it, because I don't expect you to be here for 1.5, 2 hours or whatever it's going to be, because people come and go. So ask whatever you want to ask and feel free to do so, please. And I'll try and give some sort of intelligent response. I've got the Dexter the dog is sort of in and out. So if there's some barking at some point, just ignore it. It means he's seen a bird or something outside, something incredibly dramatic. So let's get right down to it. Hope you can see and hear me. I always quite like having a few thumbs up just to say that everything's working, because you never know with the internet. But I think it's all right, isn't it? Kind of going. Right, Anthony Virtue, VER. Hi Peter, I was wondering why you dismiss a driver's form. If you look at any other sport, tennis, golf, soccer, players definitely go through patches of form. Well, yeah, they do. But I always think it's a bit of a cliche cop-out word to describe something that's actually real and specific to be working on. And I think it's an overused word, and it's too often used just to describe a bad patch. Whereas in reality, it's not that, is it? It's because they've suddenly, in the case of cricket, they've suddenly stopped, taking guard on the leg stump, and they've started to go for the middle stump or something, and it's led to 4 or 5 dismissals, and quite a lot of people will say, oh, bad form, he's in terrible form. He's actually done something technically different. And it's the same in motor racing. It's not form, it's to do with things not feeling right in the car. The driver doesn't have the right balance in himself. He doesn't have the feel for the surface of the road. So I'm quite dismissive of the word form, only because I think it's very overused, and I don't really know what it means anyway. I don't think it explains what athletes go through. If you think about golf as another sport, but I know a little bit about, if a great golfer, I mean, let's take Jordan Spieth, good example, winning majors, now struggling to win 1 or 2 tournaments a year. He will come back for sure, but it's not because he's in bad form. It's because his body has changed somehow. He's got some injury that he's recovering from. Everything's slightly different, and so he's working on a slightly different swing. It's all to do with technical things within the spectrum of how technical it can be in a golf swing, and so it goes on. So it's all to do with the body, the physical body. It's not form, i.e. wake up. See, my understanding of the word form is you wake up and you think, oh, I don't really feel like driving a racing car today, or I don't really feel like hitting a golf ball. And that's how quite a lot of people actually dismiss poor performances. They use the word form and they assume that it is that without actually delving deeper. So I just think it's a pretty lazy way of describing the ups and downs of sport. That's why I'm dismissive of the word. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And the same gentleman, Anthony Virtue, asking another question. Would drivers' form not be down to a mixture of confidence in himself, confidence in the car, physical condition, emotional condition, preparation? Well, it is. But if you want to wrap all that up and say Max Verstappen's in really good form at the moment, you can. But I wouldn't. I would say he's a very good driver doing what he does well in a phenomenally good racing car with a very good engineer with whom he works. That's what it is. It's nothing to do with form. It's all explainable stuff. It's not out there in the, in the atmosphere where we can't really define what it is. So that's it. I mean, we're probably talking about the same thing. It's just that I don't like that word form, because I think it's too much of a cliche, and it's too dismissive of other detail. Okay, hope that makes sense. Erin Lasky, when building an F1 car, how critical is the driver's input? Do young drivers like Lando, George, Charles have those development skills? Well, when you say building, do you mean from the track, from the day it first turns a wheel, turning that car into a very good racing car? Or do you mean from the design stage onwards? if the latter, from the design stage onwards, they're always developing the car based on previous information. Even if there's a regulation change, there's still going to be building blocks upon which they continue to build, to do with the vehicle dynamics, to do with the suspension, the tire performance, the aerodynamics, obviously the weight, and those building blocks never go away. Now, some of those building blocks are more clearly defined by some drivers than others. So the purest of racing drivers who drive somewhere near perfection, under the heading that it's it's almost impossible to drive the perfect lap, let alone the perfect race, but somewhere near perfection. And we're talking the great Grand Prix drivers now, so say Max, Lewis, Charles of the current crop, would have an impact because the engineer has worked with those drivers to the point where he knows what the driver can impart into the car. If he really wants a really good pointy front end, but he knows that's going to make the rear a little bit difficult to deal with on high speed corners. If he knows Max Verstappen is his driver, he's more likely to go in that direction than if he's got two rookies or two guys paying to be in the team. So it would define it. It would play a role. The character of the driver and the talent of the driver would play a role in the design and conception of the car at those two extremes. At the general level of Formula One, they're just going for the best aero efficiency they can have, be on the minimum weight limit, and obviously try to have a big sweet spot in the car to enable them to do great tire management. And most of that, the engineers will believe they can create through all the knowledge they have, regardless of the drivers they're working with. And in terms of developing the car, it kind of goes back to what I was just saying, that if you've got a Max or a Lewis in there, if they come in and say, I've got understeer with that setting we've got on the rear now, but I can live with that because I've got such good traction now that I can live with that, then that's how the engineer makes progress. But if the driver's coming in saying, I've got understeer, got to get rid of the understeer, and the engineer says, well, you got good traction though. Yeah, I know, but I've got to have good I don't want understeer. And then he gets rid of the understeer, but then the traction goes, then they're going around in circles, which happens quite a lot, obviously. And you wouldn't get any current team to admit that, but believe me, it's true. So it kind of depends. It very much depends on the driver that they're working with. And it's not so much the experience, it's how good that driver is, how good he is in terms of feel and what he knows he can do, regardless of what the car is letting him do, if you see what I mean. That's why Michael was so good. Anthony, again, surely going into Austria, if you compare Max and Perez, Max is in such a good place at the moment. He'll be driving with complete confidence, while Perez is in the exact opposite boat. Yeah, but that's quite a good example of why I think form can be a bit of a misleading thing. Because in my opinion, and I may well be wrong, in my opinion, I did predict Charles Leclerc to win the Canadian Grand Prix, remember? But he was pretty good, actually, wasn't he, until qualifying came along. In my opinion, Perez will be very near Max in Austria because it's on a very difficult circuit. And there are a couple of places where his major talent, which is just putting the power down beautifully and managing the tires as he does so, and really good feel for traction, will come into play in Austria. Out of turn 1, out of turn 2, not 3. A little bit out of the last corner as well. So actually, I think Perez will be quite near, and it's a very short lap anyway, not many corners. So I would go the opposite way. I would say Perez is actually due for quite a good race in Austria, would be my take on that. We just had a very nice coloured question from Frank saying, hi Peter, I've been following your program for years. I follow Formula One for 51 years. Wow, I missed your comments on Max in Brazil 2016. Oh, okay, all right, but keep it up. Thank you very much. And Max in Brazil was phenomenal as ever, and it's always a joy to watch him offline when the grip's not very good, to see how he picks up where the grip is on the corner, and he does that extremely well. It was quite difficult seeing that in Canada for some reason. I kept watching, but I blame the camera angles that we saw. It wasn't clear very much to see what Max was doing there, but generally He's really good at picking up the grip. But thank you very much, Frank, for that comment. Very kind. So that's one going into Austria. Gandalf the Fool. Hi, Peter. Hope you're doing well. I am. Thank you very much. Interesting question for you. If you could only pick one, which would you pick? Subtle input or short corners? This is a reference to all the stuff I've been going on about how Max and other great drivers, Lewis and Charles, I think do have shorter corners. They create shorter corners than a lot of their peers on the grid at the moment. And I've often said, subtle inputs are really important. If it was one or the other, if you were born with one or the other, the ability to create short corner, I mean, you can't really answer the question because you can't create a short corner without having incredibly subtle inputs to manage the car in that critical moment when you're coming out of the brake pedal pressure and you're about to rotate the car. And you can't do that without subtle inputs. So that, one is inextricably linked to the other. But I would say of the two, subtle inputs are probably more important because if you take, I take Ayrton Senna as a good example of a driver that wasn't really a short corner driver, but his inputs are incredibly subtle. That was the main thing about Ayrton. It's just incredible sensitivity, but he didn't translate that into short corners because it just wasn't what he did. So that would be the thing. And it's almost impossible to be a great racing driver without having that feel for suppleness and subtle inputs. And footwork is very much a part of that as handwork, probably more important than handwork, from what I know from talking to all the great drivers at some point or another. Not all of them, starting from Sterling. I never got to speak to Fangio or Ascari, obviously, or any of the others, but from Sterling onwards, I think I've spoken to all the greats, and all of them say footwork is generally more important than handwork. Gandalf the Fool again. Also, in your opinion, is there a type of car that would fundamentally suit Carlos Sainz better than Charles? I think Formula One cars in the past are much more nimble and require some good car control. Thanks. No, I don't think there's a car that would suit... Well, the better the car, the more grip the car has and the more balance it has and the bigger sweet spot it has, any racing driver is going to benefit. I think what you could say is the opposite. I think if you've got that sort of car, it's more difficult for a driver like Charles Leclerc to look good alongside Sainz, to show up Sainz, if you like, because it would just even them up to the point where Sainz would start to do a few things a little bit better than Charles and vice versa. But it wouldn't be one of these. They'd be very close if it was a great car with massive balance. And we've seen that with Perez and Verstappen. That on the day when Perez has kind of got everything going for him and everything's gone right and Max has had a few issues, he can beat Max Verstappen, just as Valtteri Bottas could beat Lewis Hamilton in a very good car. And so it's a good car. A good car actually minimizes the difference between the two drivers because they're easier to drive, basically, and there's a bigger sweet spot. So if you wanted to give Carlos Sainz the best possible car, you'd go for that. I think what you're getting at, does he like the front end or the back end or whatever? I think he's definitely a rear-endy sort of driver. So if he's got a good front end, he can live with the rear quite well. So I think with Carlos, what you could say is don't give him a car that understeers, and you'll be okay, kind of, with him. Whereas Charles can live with both, and that's the difference. When Charles being Charles, I'm not so sure that the Charles we've seen since Melbourne is the real Charles Leclerc. I wish he'd sort of re-emerge and come out from under that bushel over there. I see Freddie Vasseur said he's hired some mega new engineer, but he's under contract till 2025 with his existing team, top engineer. I don't think it's Adrian Newey. So if it's not Adrian Newey, I'm interested to know who that is. Anybody got any thoughts? You can let me know. So Joe, g'day Joe. Hi Peter, how safe is Perez's seat at the moment, and who would your realistic alternative be? Well, Daniel Ricciardo, of course. I think so long as, and I think he's had a few wake-up calls, hasn't he, Sergio, in the last couple of races as to who's boss there and who's really the championship contender, and it's Max Verstappen, thank you very much. He was getting a bit ahead of himself after his wins in, Saudi Arabia and Baku. He was getting a bit ahead of himself, and then the shunt in qualifying at Monaco quietened things down a bit, and hasn't really looked very good since then. So, well, that's not true. I mean, Miami was all right, but he did get blown away, didn't he, by Max? And then Canada, he was not very good in qualifying again. So it depends. As I've said all along, it depends how you look at it. So long as he's happy to be the wingman for Max Verstappen, which is the role he's playing now by default because he's making mistakes and not doing a particularly good job, the team works very well and it's harmonious, and Max wins race after race after race. It's when he actually wins Baku that things are a bit unstable, and you think, well, did Red Bull really want this guy? So in reality, what Red Bull don't want is a guy that's going to put any pressure on Max or distract Max from what he's doing incredibly well. And I think Daniel would do that. And the only risk that Perez has now for his seat will be if he wins Austria and, I don't know, wins Silverstone and wins Hungary, and suddenly he's talking again about, I can win the championship this year. That's when he's going to be in risk of his seat, I think. You know, most people would think, oh, you know, that would be great, wouldn't it? But the reality is that's not what Red Bull want. So, you know, if it continues as is, I don't think he's in any risk at all, because that's kind of how they expected him to be anyway. But if he does again have a winning streak and gets a bit, you know, I can win the championship here and I want fair treatment and all this stuff, then, and there's nothing wrong with my car, even when when there's something wrong with his car, even when there isn't, then they might think, well, I'll put Daniel Ricciardo in the car. He'll just smile and laugh and have a good time. So he would be the alternative, I think. And you know, I would imagine Perez, well, he probably hasn't learned. He's probably just thinking, because if he wins Austria, he'll probably get back on the same soapbox and start saying, I can win the championship, which wouldn't be the right thing for him to do if he wants to keep his seat at Red Bull, in my opinion. Adam Pearson. Hi, Peter. With all the restrictions on wind tunnel, CFD, budget, etc., why doesn't Formula One restrict teams' data and sim tools? Wouldn't we get more interesting and incorrect strategy choices, better racing? Well, the premise of the new regulations that came out in 2022 was not necessarily to mix things up to the point where we had great racing like that. It was just to make it easier to follow another car, to have more overtaking. There was never an issue or never an essence of what can we do in the regulations to make it really difficult for Red Bull to win races, or whatever you know what we're kind of getting at there. So that's a quantum shift. If you're going to do that sort of thing, it's a quantum shift of the whole philosophy of Formula One. And it kind of comes under the heading of what Greg Maffei, the president of Liberty, was saying on the grid before the race in Canada, when he said, you know, he wanted to get rid of all the gearboxes and just have a standard gearbox for all the cars. Now, I find that hard to understand. I hear what he's saying, that it would make more sense financially, but how's that work with companies like Audi and Honda and Ford and all these big manufacturers that Formula One's worked so hard to attract? How's it work when you say to them, yeah, do the power plant, but with the powertrain has got to be a standard X-Track gearbox or whatever it's going to be? It just doesn't make sense to me. I know there's been a lot of talk in the past, even going into these 22 regulations, to have a standard gearbox, and the teams rejected it correctly, I think, rejected that idea. But here's Greg Maffei saying it's going to be revisited, or he wants to revisit it, and that to me is quite a big thing. And you know, it's not what you're doing now, restricting data and sim tools and all that, but you know, you're getting near, Adam, to saying, why don't they just run Dallara F2 cars and call them F1 cars, put F1 engines in the back, and everybody runs the same car? Because in order to enter the Formula One World Championship, you have to design and build your own car. And if you're going to design and build your own car, you've got to do it with some sort of tool, whether it be sim, whether it be a drawing board, whether it be CFD, whether it be wind tunnel, whatever it is. You've got to have design tools and designers. That's what they want. So, you know, somewhere along the line, somebody needs to, well, at the moment, apart from that comment on the grid about how they want to go to standard gearboxes, I think it's pretty clear at the moment what they want is just to make the cars easier to follow. And of course, there are going to be people out there who are going to say, oh, yeah, what can we do that about Red Bull? It's ruining Formula One. It's, you know, it's dominant, it's boring, whatever. And my attitude to that is, you can't stop people winning if they're doing a very good job, because that is what Formula One's all about. It's what sport is all about. What you can do is highlight much more all the other great things in Formula One that make the sport what it is: the technology, the finance, the travel, the work towards net zero. All that stuff could be made into its own Netflix miniseries, and it would be captivating viewing. It's all part of the Formula One show. But at the moment, we just take the icing off the cake, and we talk about the drivers on Netflix, and then we just hope the racing is going to be really close, because that'll be great, that'll be exciting, and we just ignore the intrigue of Freddie Vasseur suddenly saying he signed this mega designer. Who is it? That's good stuff. That's just as interesting if it was made properly in the form of a TV show. So, rather than keep restricting things and putting common parts on the car, I think they should really start to look at this incredible sport that they have and start to magnify all these other amazing areas they've got, as I've just named them. And that's what they should do. That's what I think they should do. Another great question. Thank you very much, from David Earthling. Another yellow question. Bit of an overreaction to Sergio's recent slump. He'll be fine. Formula One fans love the drama. Yeah, he will be fine. I mean, as I say, I think he'll go very well in Austria. He's a pretty good racing driver, let's face it. I mean, he beat Max pretty conclusively in Baku, and you've got to be pretty good to do that. I'm obviously understating the case. So thank you very much for that. I totally agree with you. I mean, he's very, very good, Sergio Perez. And I've often said how good he is in terms of that one area. He's superb. And it doesn't mean to say he's not good in others. He's about as good as most of the others in every other area. And he's got a good chance of being very, very near Max in Austria. And if something goes wrong with Max, he could easily win that race. Easily. So it's not as if he's in a slump or in trouble. So yeah, thank you for that. Suddenly the whole thing's jumped, so I'm just going back to find out where we were. Okay. This says, hi Peter, Carlos Sainz. This is from Eric V. Romans. What are you doing there, Dexter? He's looking for mosquitoes on the wall, actually. It's probably quite a good thing. Hi Peter, Carlos Sainz and Ferrari don't seem a marriage made in heaven. What team would be a better match? Oh, I think they do, don't they? I think they seem to be getting on very well in terms of, he's a cool guy, he's got charisma, I think he's very Ferrari, and I think, and if they expected him to go in and be Max Verstappen, obviously they'll be disappointed, but I don't think any of the current lot are that stupid, are they? I think they all know what Carlos is, more or less, and in terms of what the car's able to give him, he's doing as good a job as Charles right now, probably better. So I don't think he's in a better place than he could be. And he's tried, Toro Rosso, he's tried Renault, he's tried McLaren. I think Ferrari is a great place for him, and it'd be sad for him if he lost that Ferrari drive. And it's more of a, what are you doing, Dex? It's more of a, Charles and Ferrari isn't a marriage made in heaven, I think, and that's more of an issue. But that's presumably what Freddie Vasseur is going to be saying to Charles now. It's, wait until 2025 when so-and-so arrives. And then Charles will be thinking, yeah, he'll arrive. Then he'll spend a year designing a new car, so it'll be 26. The new regulations. So Charles then got to sit through 24, 25 before he gets a car. Yeah, it's not going to work, is it? Dexter, stop it. So Christopher Robin Garish, RBR wants Perez to come second every race behind Max. That's the contract Perez signed. He shall abide and has done so thus far. Well, yeah, except for what happened in Brazil. Well, that's still probably in the back of his mind somewhere when Max didn't let him back in front in Brazil. And I suspect in Perez's mind, all bets are off in terms of if he did sign anything along those lines, and we don't know that for sure, then wait for the moment. Wait for the moment when they say, right, championship's on the line, Sergio, you need to let him pass. He's on a different strategy. Got to let Max pass. And he'll probably say, remember Brazil. And then they'll go quiet. And then he'll wait a lap or two. And then he'll let him pass, probably. Looking forward to that. Durav Patel. Do you think Adrian has an advantage over other teams by being the only one from ground effect era? So Adrian, he's not actually the team owner of Red Bull, but it's his team in a way, isn't it? Yeah, without Adrian, it wouldn't be what it was. It's the only one from the ground effect era. Well, I would question that, because Ferrari do have Rory Byrne under contract still, and although he's in Thailand, he's very much involved in terms of communication and input. And I think that's one of the reasons a Ferrari wasn't bad in 2022, because Rory is also from the ground effect era. I've said that many times. I think Mercedes was so used to winning races with the design package they have, all the different design committees they have, that they didn't actually think outside the box and say, wow, I wonder if there's one of those old guys out there who did live through the last ground effect era, where there's anything we should just talk to him about before we press go on this design. There were plenty of them out there still. Peter Wright, very good example, who didn't get a phone call. And had they done so, had McLaren or Mercedes or any of the other teams that struggled rung Peter Wright and said, Peter, tell us about the ground effect era and the shortcomings of the ground effect era, what are the pitfalls, what should we be looking out for? He would have said porpoising, and he would have gone through it with a fine tooth comb. So none of them did that, because I think they're all so blinkered around their own way of operation, and their own way of operation is to keep everything very, very much closeted into this one design area, all these different committees, and they don't really think out of the box as a result. And that's, as you say, by natural progression, Adrian Newey was never going to fall into that trap, because he'd been there, done that. Okay, Tin Hattie, Almology. Not quite sure what that means. Pantrofli hasn't done that. Not quite sure what any of that means. Sorry. Ben Cashman's talking to Almology. You nailed it. I don't see any other driver who's that diehard off the track. I don't know what you're talking about, guys. A great number 2 driver should be able to consistently take points from the competition to increase the gap. And I don't see Perez taking points from Lewis or Alonso in a close championship. I think he will. I mean, don't judge the last few races. He's blown it in qualifying, didn't he? In Melbourne and in Canada, and he did a pretty good job of taking points from the opposition in Miami. And he's won 2 races that took points from the opposition. And Canada, he was pretty poor, wasn't he? Once the race got underway. But let's see from here. It's only it's early days, very early days. Some more coloured questions coming up. This is from looks like the name changes every live stream. This is Romain's Ferrari contract, AINS. Good name. Peter, best wishes from Medellin. Do you think Williams should have signed Nigel for 1995? Would he have beaten Michael? Good question. Very good question. I think they should have. Yeah, I think they should have. And it's the same old Williams story. It's a very good question. The same old Williams story, that they were Frank and Patrick, they're difficult people in many ways. And because Nigel was so difficult to run back then, because it was all, IndyCar thing and Formula One, and he wasn't quite as sharp fitness-wise as he was, I think, it was quite easy for Patrick and Frank to sort of go the new generation option. But had Nigel, I think it's more Nigel should have probably worked a little bit harder to get that drive. And I do. I think, obviously the big shame is he didn't stay in 93. I think he would have beaten Prost. But 95, I think he could have done it as well. It's a very good car, 95. So it's a very good question, Roman. Thank you very much. Osman. Diego Morea? Any thoughts on Ferrari's victory in Le Mans? Yeah, I mentioned that in the last live stream. It was, good. Le Mans kind of back to where it used to be in the good old days. And nice to see that. Nice to see a lot of talented drivers in there racing, and some of them getting a result, obviously, in terms of, that win and also others out there. So, I don't know. I don't have a lot of other thoughts, because I'm not massively into the World Endurance Championship. I don't know why. I just can't explain it. I just find it, I don't know what. I just don't find it as dramatic as it used to be in the days of Ford versus Ferrari, the real days, the 7-litre Fords and the V12 Ferraris and the Porsche 917. So, I don't know. I just think, what do I think? I think whenever I look at endurance racing, I feel sad that because the public don't really watch it. Le Mans putting to one side, but I'm talking about endurance racing in general, don't really watch it. It does live and die on amateur drivers who spend a lot of money wanting to race. And that's, okay, it's nothing new, but to the extent that it happens now, it keeps championships going. And then we do have some manufacturer involvement, which is good. And the hypercar thing is a good solution to the ever escalating costs. And we got some quite interesting cars as well. I don't know. I'm going around in circles, aren't I, really? I don't know. I can't really think clearly about it, to be honest. I've got too busy with Formula One, so thanks for your question. But yeah, good to see Ferrari win that at least. And I think I said at the time that a lot of people will be saying, oh, you know, why don't they give... Well, I said, you know, give up Formula One and just focus on that. They'll get more publicity and get more out of it probably than doing what they're doing in Formula One. Of course, that won't happen, but, you know, that they did make it look very, very professional and very good, I thought. Darth Lord Raven. Wow, what a name. Apex. At Apex. Twin, they respect each other more. Alonso knows... I'm not quite sure this. He has no chance on the championship. Not quite sure what that's all about. Christopher Robin Garish. The philosophy of Formula One is to extract as much cash as possible from a circus of maniacs who love to race cars and those who love to watch. It's just a show for dollars. Well, I'm not sure. It depends what you mean by the philosophy of Formula One. It's not that's not the philosophy of many of the Formula One people I know. It might well be the philosophy of the people that commercially own Formula One, but it's certainly not the philosophy of people who build the cars or indeed run the teams. I don't think anybody is in it purely because it's a license to print money. It's too aggravating, it's too difficult, and it's too demanding physically. So I think a lot of people do care about where the sport is going with the rules and the technology and how much technology we should have. Yes, the commercial rights holders do only think of money, but they are responsible to the team. So that's why, for example, once already the teams have rejected the concept of having a standard gearbox. Everybody's going on about Perez will only be replaced once the other teams catch up. MM55. I'm not. I mean, there's this thing about, you know, the other drivers there for the Constructors' Championship. I wouldn't be thinking that way if I was running a team. I'd be thinking, I want Max or I want Charles or Lewis, or whoever I wanted as the driver. And then I'd want a compatible driver in the other car to get the best from my number one superstar. That's what I want. I wouldn't be thinking, and who's the best driver to have in the other car to get the most constructors points? You can't think that far ahead. All you want is your guy to be in the best possible position to win if you give him a good car. That's what you want. And so there's a lot of second guessing going on about all that. And yeah, the constructors will take care of itself if you're doing a very good job with your first driver. I firmly believe that. And that was the Michael philosophy. And he was right. Another question from Romain's Ferrari contract. Romain's Ferrari contract. Peter. Oh, it's the same one. Okay, it's just come up twice. All right, sorry about that. I was going to say, wow, another one, but there isn't. Anyway, thanks for that one. Martin, SCH. Good morning from Brisbane. Good morning. Yeah, often listen to Australian radio here in Spain. It's always the middle of the night in Australia, of course. So it's, you know, the chat shows are a bit ropey at that time, 3 a.m, but nice to know it's morning in Brisbane now. And congratulations to all Australians on that unbelievable win in the opening test in the Ashes series. What 2 great innings has Khawaja put in, and then to have Nathan Lyon and Pat Cummins do what they did. Just sensational sport, sensational cricket. Anyone who doesn't think Test cricket is the heart of what that sport is all about shouldn't be allowed to watch any cricket at all. Edwin Toonan. Perez did what Horner wished for. He challenged Max. Since Perez said he could win the championship, Max won all races. Max gave him in the US a lesson of what it takes to win a world championship. Thanks, Checo. Yeah, but the point is Max doesn't need that in order to be Max. That's the point. I think a lot of team people out there, probably Zach Brown with Lando Norris, think that their chosen driver needs somebody to push them really hard. Great class drivers never need that. They know how quickly to go. They know what the car can do, and they drive accordingly from the surface of the road, not from the other driver. And as I say, Max is good enough to have beaten Sergio is good enough to have beaten Max, and as was Valtteri Bottas, as I keep saying. And as Perez has won races for Ferrari. I mean, they had to keep... Leclerc, Silverstone last year was still ridiculous, wasn't it? How they didn't bring Leclerc in for new tyres. I still can't believe that. Anyway, experience, good day. Love where Formula One is now. Good to hear. The best driver and engineers and strategists are the winners. Good to hear. I like that. And it's very clear, very simple, and that is what racing and Formula One's all about. Bob is replying to M.A. Khan saying, perhaps it's kind of weird when people call Red Bull a rocket ship. SW, why did Hamilton's car pick up debris but Alonso's didn't? Secondly, what is the difference between Alonso beats Hamilton or finishes in front of him? What is the difference between Alonso beating Hamilton or finishing in front of him? Quite sure I understand that bit. I mean, the debris thing, obviously, it's where it's just the luck of the draw, really. It's all flying around, and some of it might come into the radiator inlets, brake ducts, whatever, side pods, and some not. The drivers do their best, obviously, to avoid it, but there's so much turbulence and so much debris swirling around that it's impossible to do that. And as we know, Max thought he hit a bird as well, so he did. Very sad for the bird, if that's the case, but it looked like it didn't have any real impact on the car. I don't understand. What is the difference between Alonso beats Hamilton or finishes in front of him? You mean, if he finished in front of him, did he actually beat him? Is that what you mean? Yeah, it's possibly a reference to my video when I said he beat him, and I said, it's probably too strong a word, he finished in front of him. Only because I think Hamilton had a more difficult car, and with that debris thing, I think, it was. I thought Lewis drove really well to finish where he did, and Alonso did the right job cruising, but with the rear brake problem he had, and that's it. I just think you don't apply the word beat if somebody, unless it's a absolutely fair and square contest, and you say he beat him. Kind of what happened in Baku, actually. I keep saying it, Perez beat Max in Baku. But I would struggle to say Alonso beat Hamilton in Canada. He finished in front of him and he drove really well, but Lewis did have that issue. So slightly different. It's just, slightly different terminology, that's all. Bit like form versus not going very well. Apex Twin. Wow, that's a good name. Twin Apex. It's weird though, isn't it? Why? Is Aston Martin more competitive? Maybe there'd be less respect. I don't know. I think Fernando at the moment is being Mr. Nice Guy. A, because it's so nice to be back on the podium again. B, because everybody's around him again telling him how wonderful he is. When in the past, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it was only Peter Windsor and Nigel Roebuck saying that. And now everybody's jumping on the bandwagon. Oh, Fernando, what a great megastar he is. And we're just saying, he is. Always has been. Never went away. And then thirdly, I think he's very wary of being Mr. Perfect for Aston Martin and trying to extend his longevity at Aston Martin for into the next 2 or 3 years. And the more Mr. Nice Guy he is and the more helpful to young Lance he is, the better. That's what you're seeing with Fernando at the moment. Boogie Boy 666 Dexter, what are you doing? Come on now, settle down. Formula One is above all an engineering series. It's what makes the sport special. That's brilliant, and good to hear you say that, Boogie Boy. I wonder, probably a lot of people out there disagree with him, don't they? Which is sad, but I don't disagree with him. It's always been a technical sport, and the great drivers in harmony with the best cars are a joy to watch. Nexu Jin, Schumacher winning all the time was why I once tuned out of Formula One. Oh, that's a shame. I love watching Michael win, not because I wanted him to win per se, but I loved watching the way he went about creating those wins. Every race was different. Every challenge was different, and he created all that. I love watching perfection, as near as perfection as you can get, regardless of whether he's winning easily or not. I love watching that. So yeah, I have to disagree there. So I don't know what's that. Something about tinfoil. He's replying to somebody else. Okay, so I'm not really into all that stuff. The whole chat thing has jumped again. So let's go back to where we were. Is Dean Lawrence says, "Hi Peter." Thank you very much, Dean. Nice coloured question. Hi Peter. You say Lewis brakes early, but Mark Hughes at the race says he's a late breaker with aggressive steering. Oh no, well he said that about. Yeah, he said that, isn't he? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I can't comment. I think Mark must have been misquoted there, because I just can't believe he thinks he's got aggressive steering. Although I have said this year with the B spec Merc, I think Lewis is definitely working the front tyres more than he has done at any stage of his career. But he's not doing it with aggression. He's doing it with slightly longer corners and just leaning on the tyres a little bit more, as Max was in Barcelona. So that Lewis, and he says Lewis is a late breaker. No, well, I make the point that it's very difficult for anybody to make a call about who's a late breaker or an early breaker, because you can stand at, say, the 100-meter board on any straight and see who's backing off first or last, who's staying on the brakes a little bit later. And I'm sure F1 have lots of telemetry and graphics which can show you exactly who's braking at what point. But at what point are they finishing the braking area? That's the critical thing that they never ever take into account. Are they assuming that Lewis and, I don't know, Valtteri Bottas brake to the same point? Give me a break, B-R-E-A-K. They're not. Lewis is braking to a completely different rotation point to Valtteri Bottas or Carlos Sainz. So how can you possibly compare what they're doing at the beginning of the braking area in terms of who brakes later and sooner if Lewis is braking to a different point? He may well be braking even earlier than we think. He may be braking even later than we think. We don't know. To my eye, he definitely brakes quite early, because he, like Max, he's not interested in the 1.5 meters he might be able to gain by staying on the throttle for another millisecond. He's much more interested in getting the load into the front of the car and then braking hard with the load settling all around the car. That is what Lewis is all about, always has been. Sometimes that does manifest itself in looking as if he's braking quite late. But generally speaking, alongside a Carlos Sainz or a Sergio Perez, he will look to be braking quite early, generally speaking. But again, you've got to take into account the point he's braking for, and that's his rotation point. And that's a very different rotation point, because he has very short corners compared with, say, Sergio Perez. So, I don't know. I can't say any more than that. I'm not going to get into any sort of discussion with Mark. A lot of respect for Mark, but I can only imagine he's been taken out of context. I think if he says he's aggressive, I just don't see that. I've never seen Lewis aggressive with the steering. I've seen him extend the straights, and I've seen him shorten the straights, but I've never seen him be aggressive with the steering. Maybe he has. Callaway, new sponsor, KTO. Actually, I'd love to say, yeah, clubs, balls, some kit, a bit of money, prize money, bonus money. But I've got to say no. It's just that I was out in the range a bit earlier, and typical Windsor, I completely forgot to switch caps, so I'm not going to do it now. But a big thanks at this point to Jetcraft and to Pitbox.io for their support of this channel, and obviously of this live stream. And you can see them down there now, and they'll be in the description as well. Take a look at those companies, great supporters of this channel. So big thanks to them. I'm sure they won't mind this cap for one live stream. And Callaway do make very good clubs, gotta say. In Borix, I really enjoyed the improved chemistry between Max and Lewis. How about you? I was a bit confused by that. Lewis saying, did he say it was an honour or a thrill or was cool or what? I don't know. But to me, he said about on the podium with 2 world champions. Says the 7 times world champion. I don't know. I think it was Lewis. I think it was just the kid in Lewis coming out, wasn't it? He was excited to be out there with these 2 mega world champions. I think Lewis is Sir Lewis. Maybe it's the Sir Lewis. he's got a lot of dignity. He's got a lot of dignity, and I've always said that. He's a really nice guy, and I've never understood people that don't like him or don't rate him or whatever. I find that extraordinary, because he's a very cool guy, nice guy, and he cares a lot about people and other people. I think that's my opinion. That's the Lewis I know. Anyway, I can't say any more. I don't know much about their improved chemistry. Didn't look to be, when they were talking in the green room, Lewis said something. The first thing he said was, did you have, wow, the bouncing was terrible or something like that. It was a really tough race. And you could see Max he didn't want to give anything away at all, did he, about what the Red Bull was really like to drive. So he said, you could see his brain ticking over, and he was thinking, I better not say, no, it was incredibly good on my car, or it was there, but I lived with it. It wasn't an issue. So he said, yeah, it wasn't very good. Yeah, it's quite a lot. Yeah, it depends, the curb. Then he changed the subject of the curb straight away. I thought that was quite funny to do that. So, yeah. Ryan E., I missed this one. Do you play F1 Fantasy? If so, who's on your team? No, I don't actually. No, I don't even know how to play it, let alone play it. Sorry. Can't really get my head around things like that. I'm not very bright on things like that. I just I know who I would have if I had my own team right now, I guess, and how it would work, but all this fantasy stuff I can't really get into. In Hatman F1, speaking of Callaway caps. Peter, what advice would you give to someone trying to get a career in the world of motorsport, Formula One, such as me? Well, I can only speak for myself. And I started by working at the local motor racing club in my school holidays for no money, but I did get a free lunch every day. And I was quite happy to write the cards out of the drivers from the previous race meeting and go through and list every lap, to do the subscriptions for the club membership, to clean the cars, to get the lunch, and generally to be at the front desk and answer any inquiries about new members. And I used to love that. I did it every day of my school holidays for about 3 years. And then as soon as I left school, I went to work there full time and actually got paid a little bit and became a press officer. I think I was initially at Warwick Farm, the racetrack, and a flag marshal. I was a flag marshal all the time I was at school, and then press officer. And then I started writing for local magazines and newspapers. And then Autosport offered me a job in the UK. No, David Phipps did, but I also wrote a bit for Autosport as well. So that's how I got started. And even then, I wanted to be a racing driver or a mechanic or something. I just thought, journalism is probably the easiest way in through the door, and then I'll decide what I really want to do. But I had such a great life quite quickly that I didn't really want to stop. And so here I am, 50 years later, still doing it, really. But it depends what you want to do, what you want to be. I would say don't set your sights on Formula One. Just start in motor racing in general. I love all motorsport. Appreciate every racing driver for being who they are. And just give it everything you got, but don't focus on Formula One because it's the most glamorous or the most interesting. All motor racing is interesting, and you can learn a lot at club racing level, definitely. So that one was from Dean Lawrence, and this one's come up. I think I'm just going to make sure I've answered this one. Okay, this is a different one. Ben Cashman, where do you think the next gen racing power plants will go? I.e. hydrogen tech, gas turbine again. Well, they're going to 50% electrification in 2026, so I can't imagine they're going to start playing around too much with in other directions. But wouldn't it be funny if they went back to gas turbines as the future? Bring back Colin Chapman and the Lotus 56 Pratt & Whitney turbine wedge car, which didn't make much noise. It whistled its way around, and of course it nearly won the 68 Indy 500 in the hands of Joe Leonard. It's the car Jim Clark should have raced. He tested it, loved it. Could be that. Hydrogen, I don't know enough about the ins and outs of hydrogen. What I do know is that Paddy Lowe has got this company called Zero Petroleum. I'd love to see whatever Paddy's Zero Petroleum is, and I'm sure it's brilliant because it's Paddy Lowe created. I'd like to see that in Formula One. I think that would be a good way to go. I don't even know whether or not that's compatible with the 26 regulations. Maybe. Be nice if it was, wouldn't it? So that one. Joss Govers. I've seen Verstappen racing on kart tracks very early. He was already fierce and very good. Yeah. He was brilliant in karting. You couldn't watch karting when he was in it without thinking, "Yep, this guy's got it. He's got it." He doesn't drive quite like Joss. He's a bit different, a bit like Nico actually, versus Keke. Although in karts, I remember watching Nico at Kerpen one year, and he was quite oversteery and quite Keke Rosberg like. I actually said that to Michael. We were both watching him. I said, "Oh, he drives like his old man." And Michael said, "Really? How did his old man drive? What was he like?" And then we had a good chat about Keke. Okte Yilmaz says, "Max is our new Schumacher." Well, it's a slight difference in that Schumacher put together the team. I know he was at Benetton and that was it, and he won his 2 championships. But when he won the string of championships, he put that team together with Todd and Ross Brawn at Ferrari, and he played very much a managerial role as much as a driver role. And he had this great feel for how to handle people, get the best from the mechanics, the engineers. If any of them had any personal dramas, Michael would get involved. He was very much a hands-on team player. And I'm not sure Max could do that. If you said to Max, if Ferrari said to Max, "You can come to Ferrari, bring whatever engineers you like, whatever mechanics you like, but you can't have Adrian Newey because he's staying at Red Bull," would Max know who to bring and exactly how to make it work at Ferrari? I'm not convinced that he's got that talent that Michael had. He's got more talent in other areas, but I don't think he's got that. Jackie Stewart had that. He created the Tyrrell team with Ken Tyrrell, obviously. And Niki Lauda had that with Luca Montezemolo. He put together that team. Max hasn't yet put together a team. He's gone into a team that's perfectly set up by Christian Horner, and he's the perfect driver for that perfect team. But he hasn't created his own team yet. Not that he has to, and it's not necessarily anything that he ever will do. All I'm saying is, if you want to compare him with Michael, you need to bear that one in mind. Michael Cohenberg, "Max will definitely go into long distance racing." Okay, well, let's wait and see. I wish you'd do some now, then I'd be a lot more interested in it. I wish all the drivers would. I'd love to see Lewis and Max and Charles and all these guys in endurance racing. Then I could sort of make some sense of it all, and it would be great, wouldn't it? It'd be brilliant. Kind of makes sense now. I keep waffling about it, but I suppose the reason I waffle, I don't know enough about it. I've got to be truly honest. I don't really know enough about the difference between the cars. I think I know most of them. I went through the entry list with the drivers. I knew most of them, how they perform and who they are. But the cars, I've no idea really about the difference between them. So I find it quite difficult to understand it. I suppose that's what the real issue is. There, I've put my hand up. That's my issue. Central 99 says, "Who in Formula 2 do you think has that short corner ability of Max, Lewis and Charles?" I would say definitely Frederick Vesti. Noticed it when he was in Formula 3, and he's always had that talent. And if you look just in recent races, even in the wet sprint race in wherever that last one was, Barcelona, you could see there into turn 1, anywhere on the track, you could see when he was behind other cars, how early he was, how short his corners were. That's the reason he's good. He's really good. So I rate him. I think Iwasa, actually, quite naturally has quite short corners too. I'm quite impressed with Iwasa. And he's got a few other... He's very good in a number of ways. He's balanced. His car always looks nice and sort of square to the road. Very, very good. I rate him very highly. And I think Théo Pourchaire he's certainly not a Carlos Sainz type driver. He's more sort of George Russell. He's a little bit inside Sainz, but he's not, and his corners are shorter than Lando's, but he's not in the Lewis category or the Max category. But Teo's verging towards that. So I think he's another guy that I think's got a lot of talent, actually. I think he's very good. But Vesti's the guy that springs to mind most. And he's the most, even though I think he's going really well at the moment, I think he might even be leading the championship, I don't know, but he's definitely under the radar when people talk about talent. But to me, that's because he does drive in that very unobtrusive early corner, short corner way, and you don't really notice how quick he is until you see the stopwatch. Sorry, do they call them stopwatches anymore? The lap time. So there we go. Sunny Chandru Mahabani. Sorry, Sunny. Chandru Mabubani. Your thoughts on Verstappen banned from racing in the Nurburgring? I didn't know he had been. You mean the old Nurburgring or the new Nurburgring? Quite sure what that's all about. Is that if it's that he's been banned from the proper Nurburgring because he goes too quickly on what is effectively public roads, it's probably a good thing, because isn't it two-way traffic there these days? If it's the new Nurburgring, why would that be? I can't imagine if the German Grand Prix occurred again at Nurburgring, he'd be banned. It must be the old circuit. I don't know, I can't really. Or is it the South Circuit he's not allowed to race on, where they held the Eifelrennen up to 1967? I'm sure it's not that. Dimitris Papadopoulos. Hey, Dimitris, if it's you, hi, buddy. Nice to hear from you. Thank you very much. Did you ever hear about Ferrari's moving floor back in 1999? Yeah, I heard about lots of things about Ferrari back in 1999 that were going on, and we just all shrugged it off then. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get this chair a bit higher. As being, if Bernie's going to allow it to happen, it's because he needs Ferrari to win a few races and do something about the TV ratings. That's how we used to shrug it off in those days. Yeah, I think they had a pretty flexible floor back in 1999. Days of, was it Chris Dyer, I think, was on Michael's car then, wasn't he? And Ross. Yeah, Ross was very clever. I was going to say shrewd, but I'm saying clever because he's a very important guy. So, yeah, Dimitrios, it was moving. I think if you spoke to anybody in the mid-60s about Ferrari and Monza, they would all say, yeah, they all run big engines, but not much we can do about it. I'm not saying Ferrari have always done that, but over time, I think encouraged a little bit by Bernie, the odd nudge, the odd wink, they've got away with a few things. Because Bernie knew it was good for business. And if Bernie was I was going to say around now, he is around now, but if Bernie was running Formula One now, he would probably be giving and Charlie was still with us, he'd be giving the odd wink to Charlie about the weigh scales with Ferrari and whatever, I think. Darth Snarf, what a name. There are infinitely better ways to print money than making a Formula One team. Yeah, that's probably in response to what I was saying. If you want to make money, you don't run a Formula One team. What is it they say? It's the easiest way to lose $1 million. What's stopping, Jassa says, what's stopping Formula One from hosting races in sequential order around the planet to prevent crazy back and forth flights and hence increased emissions? You mean all these zigzagging around the world? Yeah, everybody asks that question all the time, particularly all the mechanics as they're queuing up for yet another long-haul flight to a country they've just come back from. What is it? Some of it is history, isn't it? And that's when that race is. And then they get new races coming on the calendar, and that's the only slot, so that has to go there. And this race doesn't want to change because it's there. And the North American races are more concerned with what goes on in the autumn. Is it the autumn? The fall and the fall to do with football and other sports and potentially losing viewing figures, I guess. That's what used to be the excuse, and that's why they wanted them early. A bit like the golf now, everything's early, British Open comes and the season's over, basically. And it's all to do with they don't want to impinge on football. And then you got the World Cup and all that, which occurred. I'm not really answering the question very well because I think it's just, like you, I think it's completely ridiculous. I think, what I do think is that Australia should have the last round, and we should always finish in Australia, great country to finish the championship in, and then everybody goes off on holiday in Australia. And I think the first round should be South Africa. Makes sense to me. And yeah, once we're in North America, we should have all the North American races. But let's think about it. Why we go to Canada and then we don't go on to Austin? Why aren't we going on to Austin now? Because probably Spain is locked into this sort of area. Austria certainly is, and they're big payers with Red Bull. British Grand Prix wants to be July. So where would you put Austin if you were going to have it then? And then equally, if you're Vegas and you're coming onto the calendar, You want to be as near as possible towards the end of the series, so you might get the championship finale, the deciding round, I guess, as it used to be. And you don't want to be too near Austin, probably, because it might detract from Austin. Sorry, from Vegas, if you're near Austin. That's maybe what they think. I don't know. I don't really have a straight answer, because whenever you ask anybody, nobody else has a straight answer either. It is crazy. And the amount of money that's wasted and the pollution and the energy that's wasted is, terrible. And it should be much more logical. You're absolutely right. And it used to be pretty good. We'd go to Canada, and then we'd just drive down to Watkins Glen or Detroit. That was good. And from Watkins Glen, you'd go to Mexico in the 60s. That made sense. And then you do the Bahamas Speed Week, and that made sense. But it's all difficult now. Very difficult. Is it all to do with money and who pays the most to be in certain slots on the calendar? No, surely not. Can't be that. So there we go. What's the next question? iQuantum. Will Stroll join another team so Aston can get a better driver? Wouldn't that be funny if Lance Stroll told his old man that he was leaving Aston Martin to go and drive for, I don't know, whatever, Red Bull, leaving the old man running the team that he's created and bought purely to enable his son to go racing? I don't know what, it would be funny, that's all you could say. But no, I don't think that will happen, because the whole reason that Lawrence Stroll is in Formula One and bought that team and created that whole thing is in order to give his son Lance a drive. Because I'm not sure Lance would have got a drive anywhere else. So, end of story, really. And he's actually looking worse against Alonso than anyone he's ever had next to him, isn't he? Which says a lot about Fernando. And doesn't say much about Sebastian Vettel, actually. Here's another. This has come up, a yellow question. It's probably, and it is a new one, from Jaime Velasquez. Jaime, hi, thank you very much. What do you think about the Red Bull being so ahead in the design versus the fact that they breached the cost cap rules back in 21, having in mind that they were developing the 22 car in 21? Well, they didn't breach it by that much. Not enough to have completely and utterly come up with a totally new design that blew everybody else away. That was nothing to do with the cost cap. They did actually breach it. They were penalized for it. And not being a fan of the cost cap anyway, and believing that many teams find ways around the cost cap legally, then it doesn't mean much to me, really. And I don't think... I think the reason... You could argue, if you really were on the witch hunt for Red Bull, you could say, oh yeah, and the reason they were able to produce such a good car for 23 is because the 22 car was the cheating car and they didn't have to do anything to it because it's still quick in 23. It's not that. They had to do... There were new regulations for 23, significant regulation changes, and they did a really good job. They took weight out of the car and they focused on what they could do well on a relatively limited budget for the first time. And I don't think any other team could have done that. And if they'd exceeded the budget cap by, I don't know, a massive amount of money, 40 million, maybe you could be saying that. But the amount of money they exceeded it by was not that significant, not significant enough to make the difference between a good racing car and a bad racing car. Let's put it that way. So, but you're talking to somebody who's not a fan of the budget cap. I think there are too many other restrictions and regulations, so many other restrictions and regulations that we shouldn't have that budget cap. And if a team wants to spend a lot of money doing something very cool in the technology side of things, which is brilliant for Formula One, brilliant television, let's make a Netflix series about it, then let them go ahead. As I've said several times on this live stream, it would be wonderful to know right now that Mercedes were doing a completely new car that was going to be racing in the Belgian Grand Prix. Completely new car that was going to potentially blow Red Bull away. That'd be quite a big thing. Ferrari too, but they can't do it because of the budget cap. So to me, the budget cap has a negative effect on the sport, not a positive one. And the money that's saved, as I've said before, I don't think, until they start getting rid of all those motorhomes in the paddock, European motorhomes, then I won't take budget cap seriously, I'm afraid. And indeed get the championship in order so that everything makes more sense in terms of energy consumption and expenditure. going back to the previous question. 2 easy things to do, which they'll never do. So there you go. Nikki P TV. If Max and Lewis were teammates in the Red Bull RB19, who would win the championship? Well, in order for them to be teammates, it would mean Lewis obviously joining Red Bull. And in that situation, I think it would be Max, because Max has this symbiotic relationship with Adrian, and to some extent with Christian, but for sure with Christian, but more importantly with Adrian, because Adrian is the guy. And Max knows Adrian's brain pretty well, and for sure Adrian knows Max pretty well. And there's only one Adrian, and Lewis will be chiming into that to some extent, and he'll be getting in his racing car and it'll feel great, much better than the Mercedes. And he might out-qualify Max for a 10th or 2. But in terms of overall in a season, it would be almost impossible, I think, to beat the Max Verstappen, Adrian Newey partnership, even if you're Lewis Hamilton or George Russell or Charles Leclerc or anybody, because it's not just Max and it's not just Adrian, it's the 2 of them together, a bit like Jim Clark, Colin Chapman, and that's what we need to remember about that. So it's not just a question of putting in a really quick driver. That's, it's one of the reasons Perez is a bit frustrated. It's the reason Daniel Ricciardo left Red Bull, because there's this bond between Max and the team. Let's not just call it Adrian, it's the team. That's very, very difficult to beat, to penetrate, because it is, it's born of brilliance and total understanding, and they don't need to speak very much to know what one another's thinking and needs. Adrian can look at what's going on, and then he'll know what he needs to do to the car for the next session. And Max knows what he can do in the car to make it as good as he can get, and what he needs to get Adrian to focus on in order to improve just that little bit. And that sort of understanding it's impossible to match or create overnight. You can only do it over a period of time, and Max and Adrian have that. And we should enjoy that, for what it is. It's a brilliant thing. But that's, I think, why he would beat Lewis over a championship if Lewis is at Red Bull. Alex Black, who was the better driver, Mansell or Piquet? Nigel, for me, was the faster guy, even if he wasn't as good at the politics. Yeah, Nigel was quicker, shorter corners, and just better. He was better in the wet, better in the dry. Obviously, obviously Piquet won a lot of races. The cars were good when they were together, and Nigel had some bad races. He had some terrible. Wasn't luck? Luck's another bit like form, isn't it? There's no such thing as luck, but some things went wrong at the last possible moment. Monaco '87, the wheel nut in Hungary, good examples. And I think Nigel definitely was quicker than Piquet. I think Nigel was as quick as Senna and quicker than Prost, actually. I think he was possibly still very underrated as how good he was and how quick he was. Edwin Schroeton says Perez for Nick de Vries and Norris to Red Bull. Yeah, if Lando was offered a Red Bull seat, he would take it. And maybe Red Bull would offer him a drive. And I would imagine he'd be a guy that Max would be comfortable with. They probably don't figure this into their thinking, but it would be great for them to have another long corner driver, with Max being the short corner driver, because then you got the best of both worlds. And Lando's a good guy, and he's quick. He's quite capable of winning, and he'd do a better job than Perez, I think, over a season. But yeah, I think he's under contract though for another year at McLaren, so I don't think we should get too excited about that. But yeah, no, he would do a good job. He would definitely be a good man to have in the other car. Somebody asked me this morning, I was doing an interview this morning about my perfect team, and I think I said Charles and Lando, although I was just opening the door possibly to Piastri, because Piastri does look good, and he's and unlike what I expected, he's very calm and laconic, and I really like that about a racing driver, and keeps his mouth shut most of the time, which is great. And so Piastri, I think, would do a pretty good job at Red Bull as well. But Obviously, Lando's got much more road dust, so he would be the number one choice right now. Excuse me, went down the wrong way. BH, Brands Hatch, says, the best number 2 you can have is a driver who finishes ahead of the competition and is always there when the number 1 driver ran into problems. Rubens Barrichello. Valtteri Bottas. Well, he wasn't always ahead, was he? Where was he in Abu Dhabi 21 when we needed him? Nowhere. Michael Kronenberg. Will Ricciardo replace Perez? Well, we kind of touched on that earlier. I think only if Perez gets a little bit... If he wins a race or two again and... he gets a bit full of himself talking about how he can take the championship to Max and blah blah blah, then they might replace him, and the logical guy would be Daniel Ricciardo, wouldn't he? He would be perfect for Max right now, absolutely perfect. Number 2, he'd be so grateful to be racing again and in the Red Bull. He wouldn't have any of the angst that was there before, which forced him to leave, or enticed him to leave when he should never have left in the first place, and he would be good, definitely. Hoof-hearted. Do you think Hamilton will announce his retirement at the end of this year, or will he race in addition 1 year? Well, it's just how good a salesman Toto Wolff is. Can he persuade Lewis that next year's car is going to be an absolute blinder and the championship's going to be there for the taking? Or is Lewis going to say enough is enough? As I've said several times, ever since Abu Dhabi 21 actually, I'm staggered that Lewis is driving as well as he is after what happened. And given the fact that he's won 7 world championships and he's been racing since 2007, it's amazing that he's still totally hungry and happy to be out there racing with, the bunch behind the leaders, i.e. Max, and racing hard and driving well. And it's just brilliant to watch. I'm absolutely blown away by how good he is in this situation, this Lewis Hamilton, how good this Lewis Hamilton is, compared with the other Lewis Hamilton, who was brilliant as well. So I don't know how many more Lewises there are out there, but this one is amazing to watch. And that's why I say he didn't get beaten by Alonso in Canada. He finished behind Alonso. That's how, that's why I said that, because I think it's disrespectful to Lewis to say he got beaten with a capital B. Disrespectful to the work and the drive that he put in, given who he is. And as I say, if Toto can convince him that he's got this great car for 24, then he might well stay another year. I'm sure he will, actually, the way it's going. He just seems to want to continue to race. But as I keep saying, if it is a great car, it's going to be maybe not very enjoyable for Lewis because he's got George in the other car to beat, which is not a happy, pleasant thing to have to do. He hasn't got Valtteri in the other car, and that's a problem. So that, I don't know if he would see that, because he doesn't, being a racing driver, he wouldn't want to think that. But from where I sit, that would definitely be the case. If you give a very, very good championship-winning car to both Mercedes drivers, there's going to be some aggro between Lewis and George, as I've said several times already. Lars, I thought the post-race press conference was really funny. Someone asked Hamilton about Alonso saying, "Leave it to me," but it just wasn't clear what reaction the journalist was expecting. Yeah. Well, yeah. Those sorts of comments, classic Fernando, leave it to me, absolutely. I mean, there was quite a lot of. I made a comment about it in the video, didn't I? About the way they were speaking to Charles about, what we want now, Charles, is a nice, clean, fast stint, which I thought was, very. I don't know what. It's just you don't need to tell Charles Leclerc what you need. He knows that, and it was just like, if he does respond to that, then there's something wrong somewhere, because that's not what an engineer should be saying to a driver. An engineer's job at that stage is to be giving him information that could be useful to the race he's running in his mind and feeling the surface of the road. It's not drive a fast, clean stint. I mean, what the hell does that mean? So, yeah, I wasn't impressed with that. And and Fernando made that comment, I think, because weren't they saying something like, Lewis is catching you or something, and Fernando he'd said to them, how long have I got to do this lift and coast business? because I want to try and win this race. And they said, oh, as long as we tell you to do it. And then they said, Lewis is catching you. So no wonder Fernando said that. Steve Catois, I want to see Max testing a NASCAR. It's not a very good history of Formula One drivers going over to NASCAR and doing really well. Juan Pablo Montoya did win. He won in Mexico, I think, the road course there, and Jensen's doing it now. He should go quite well on the road courses, shouldn't he? But I don't know why it is. None of them seem to go as well as Mario went, or Dan Gurney went, or Jim Clark went, even in Rockingham, when he went to Rockingham in 67. So it would be nice, but if Max is going to do something like that, he needs to do it with a really, really good team and a really good car. Otherwise, because it seems in NASCAR, if you're not in a good car, it's terrible. And it was disappointing to see Montoya, midfield a lot of the time in NASCAR. Good to see Kimi though. I thought Kimi was going to do a bit more. Probably is, but I'd like to see him on some ovals. All this NASCAR business on road courses, they should get onto ovals. That's what NASCAR's really all about. Martin SCH, could you explain how the aero paint works, please? Yeah, the Viz thing. Well, that's just all. It's just so you can see the flow of the air in a bright colour. You can actually see what the air is doing around the car. It's a pretty cool invention. And the other thing they have, of course, are the colours on the brakes, which go out depending on how hot the brakes get. So lots of cool things they have. It always looks quite good too. All the green on the cars and on Friday mornings. I love all that. Yeah. VizFlow, I think it's called. James Love. Hi, Peter. Are you going to Duns this weekend? Sadly, I'm not, James. I've got a lot on this weekend. I was thinking about it. My car, which is the ex-Jim Clark yellow Elan, is going to be there doing its thing. And I'm really pleased that it's there. It's going to be a wonderful weekend. And it's basically to commemorate Jimmy's first World Championship in 63, this being 2023, and that's a wonderful thing. But I'm kind of keeping my powder dry, as Bernie used to say a lot, for 2025, which is the anniversary of Jimmy winning the Indy 500 and the World Championship in the same year, his second championship. So I'm kind of building up what I'm going to be doing that in 25 already in my mind. But yeah, and I'm going to wish everybody the best. It's very sad that we've lost Ian Scott Watson very recently, just before this event, because he was very much a part of Jim Clark's career. Without Ian Scott Watson, I don't think Jimmy would have made Formula One. I don't think he would have been a racing driver even, perhaps. He was absolutely instrumental in getting Jimmy on the track, and he was very close to Jimmy in 63 when he won that championship. And it was only after that there was a bit of drama with the family, and he didn't go to many races after that. But that 63 championship, Ian was very much, should take a lot of credit for that as well. And he sadly just passed away, so it'll be a sad occasion, I think. But yeah, wishing all my friends there in Duns a great weekend. Thank you for asking. RB240 Tuner, do you think that the teams will be able to adapt to what they saw from the Red Bull in Monaco, or would they have to redesign the routing of the airflow in general for the car? Oh yeah, they'd need to do a lot of stuff just to get a glimpse of the Sergio Perez floor. They would need to say, oh wow, what they got here. We've talked a little bit about it with Shub. There's a lot of stuff there that they'll think, wow, that's amazing. Why have they done that? But in order to get the benefit from that, they'd need to do 6 other things. And to change all that mid-season and within the budget cap, very difficult to do. So I don't think seeing the Perez floor will really have affected anything, apart from possibly Mercedes, who are in this position to be doing lots of stuff at the moment. Maybe Ferrari, maybe. But I'm not sure. I doubt it, to be honest. Suraba Dubi. Does good racing mean a lot of overtakes? I find tension of watching Checo followed by Charles followed by Max, each 1.5 seconds apart for 20 laps, much more fascinating than 15 DRS overtakes in Saudi. Yeah, well, I couldn't agree with you more. I don't think overtaking is necessarily in itself a dramatic thing. Saudi Arabia being a great example. Miami, really, I think, I posed that question. Would Max have won that race without DRS? He was so much quicker and he was getting such good toes because of the exit of the corners. He would have done a lot of passing. He probably would have been second, I think, to Perez, but he might have won it. And like you, I'm not a DRS fan, and I love that tension and that build up, and I thought Baku was a fascinating race. And watching how the lap times changed, how Max was trying to get sector 1 sorted and not because he was good in sector 2, but usually by the time he got to sector 2 the tires were a bit hot, and watching all that was fascinating. It was nothing to do with overtaking, it was all to do with how they're managing the car. And as you say, if they're pretty close to one another, even if there's no overtaking, it is very tense. And we had that in Canada, didn't we? It was pretty good in Canada. Really good. I mean, that whole business with Alex Albon and the cars behind him, and it wasn't that he was holding them up because he was on that strategy, in which doesn't, it's not the same heading as just somebody who's a bit slower with a bit of top speed advantage holding everybody up. He was doing a great job around tire management, and he was getting quicker and quicker as the race was going on. And I made the point, and for those who haven't seen my videos, that to me, I was absolutely astonished that he was the only driver on slicks in Q2. I can't imagine what Ferrari were thinking, why they didn't have Leclerc on slicks, particularly as he had obviously had a tire temperature issue with slicks in Barcelona. You'd want to get him on as soon as possible just to get the feel for the car on slicks, because it was obvious it was going to dry. The only guy, I think, who can be excused for going out on intermediates and getting a banker lap in was Max Verstappen, because the organisation was there. Everything was perfect. All he had to do was get in better banker lap. He was always going to be quick, straight in, put on the slicks. But everybody else was faffing around, and Lando was leaving the pit lane saying, "Oh, maybe we should have been on slicks." I find it hard to understand why they don't get it. If James Bowles can get it at Williams, then everybody else should be able to get it. Great decision, and great strategy as well. Got to say, good strategy on the Ferraris as well in the race. Terrible strategy in qualifying, as I've just said. But because I would have had Leclerc on slicks and Sainz on intermediates, and I would have had Perez on slicks as well. But in the race, wow, I was amazed how well they went on that medium tyre. They can manage their tyres now. Good. That's a good sign, actually. We should take a positive out of that. And if we look at the upcoming races, Ferrari did a lot of laps on that medium tyre. So there you go. Bob Caffin, how would you compare Joss and Max? Is Max the polished diamond? Is Joss the rough version of it? That would never shine. Well, Michael loved Joss for a start. He was another of his perfect teammates, mainly because they had football in common, but they got on well, and Joss was never going to trouble Michael. But he was pretty quick. He wasn't slow. But he was very oversteery. And Max is, you wonder sometimes, is Max really Joss? The blood relationship, how could they be so different? Much more difference between Joss and Max than there is between Keke and Nico. I can't really comment about Graham. I think Graham and Damon were pretty similar, actually, in style and the way they're both very good at using the rear, lovely touch. Very similar drivers, actually. Who was quicker? Graham Hill in circa 1965, 64, 65, or Damon Hill circa 96, Good question. Surprised nobody's ever done a proper comparison of that. One of these massively rich TV stations should have been doing that with really good parallels. Anyway, going back to the question. Joss was just a mega oversteer driver with... he was forceful in the sense that he was wanting to win. I don't remember him being that forceful in terms of his overtaking and his track craft. I think Johnny Herbert was better at that, to be honest. But he was more oversteery than Johnny Herbert, and Johnny wasn't a front end driver by any means. So now you know what I mean by that. And he drove oversteer was just like, it was just like unbelievable with Joss everywhere. That's why Michael always had a laugh with him. And Max is not that at all. I'm sure Max has this aversion to being more than sort of 1.5 degrees out of line anywhere. Unless it's wet, of course. And then we saw some lovely Max drifts, didn't we, in Canada? And Lewis in the wet. coming out of the hairpin, when there's that kink, was not flat. Well, it was flat, but the car was moving a lot, and beautiful. Ooh, and Lewis, just perfect correction. And actually, I got to say, I thought Piastri too, until he hit the wall, obviously. Wow, there's a very nice yellow question here from My Two Cents. Good name. Thank you very much. Only way Ferrari can get better is if they have a clear 1-2. Red Bull did the same. You mean with driver lineup? I think Red Bull did the same. Every successful team in history followed the same rule. So why don't Ferrari follow that rule? And you know what? They've had that in the past. They had it with Nicky and Clay. They had it with... Nicky and Clay was the best one for sure, but they've had it with, obviously, with Michael, in the entire Michael era. And yet, I don't think that's what's holding them back right now, though, to be honest. I think it's more that they are Ferrari, and it's a huge company. It's very difficult to change things at Ferrari. It's got all this inertia and all this history and all this background, and you've got all these committees and subcommittees and Italian way of doing things and communication systems, and to just get in and move all that is a huge ask. And that's probably what Frederic Vasseur is finding out right now. I think up until this year, the problem has been that they were not able to let Charles breathe and be Charles Leclerc. And that's still there now. But this year, he's actually not responding at all very well. I think, we're not seeing the best of Charles at the moment. The problem is still there. But what I'm saying is, it's not because he's that good and Carlos Sainz is cramping his style. It's because he's basically kind of at Carlos's level now. They've kind of detuned him almost, and they've got these two number ones, if you like, and it's difficult. But the problem is the team rather than the lineup of drivers, I think. Because if the team was running well and they had a really good car, I think Charles would be all over Carlos, and you'd be looking at him as the championship contender. And Carlos in many ways is the perfect number two. He's quicker than Perez, I think, but he's not as quick as Charles, and he's not as quick as Lewis or Max. So he's just at that really nice level of being needing to be in a very good team in a support role of somebody as good as Leclerc. So I think the balance is pretty right at Ferrari, driver-wise. But thank you very much for that, your 2 cents, because it's an important point. Ferrari have always had issues. I mean, John Surtees, when you think about Surtees, he and Lorenzo Bandini got on very well, and there was no doubt, I think, in Surtees' mind that he was the quicker driver, and he was, obviously. And I don't think there's any doubt in Lorenzo's mind either. But the Ferrari management kept favouring Lorenzo. And, if John wanted to run the V8 at Monaco, they'd put the V12 in the car and things like that. And that's why he left the team, because he just couldn't handle that. And he was right in many ways to leave. So, I think Freddie Vasseur would agree with you, your 2 cents, my 2 cents, because he's been around long enough to know that as well, and to know how a number one, number two situation does bear fruit. So thank you very much for that. Thank you. So BH says, yeah, Max did hit a bird. The bird came on the track in a dangerous way. It's weird how the FIA didn't even look into it, let alone give the bird a penalty. Yeah, poor thing. We've had a couple of bird strikes. One of them fatal in Formula One, which was Alan Stacey in 1960 Belgian Grand Prix. Hit in the face by a bird in a Lotus 18 factory car. Very good driver, very talented guy, young guy, and he was killed. And although there were rumours, I remember talking to Innes Ireland once, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm not sure it was the bird. I think maybe the steering broke or something." But anyway, at the time it was the bird. And then Jim Clark got hit in the face by a bird in practice for the '66 French Grand Prix at Reims, and didn't race as a result. His place was taken by Pedro Rodriguez, interestingly enough, and he didn't race. But he did race at the next race, the Grand Prix at Brands Hatch, and drove beautifully. Drove one of his best races just 2 weeks later. or maybe even a week later. No, it was 2 weeks, I think. But for the first time, he had silver tape on his goggles instead of black. And I often wondered whether that was because he thought a bird might notice the silver more than black, and it would be more of a thing. But interestingly, very interestingly, I saw a book. I was flicking through a book the other day, a magazine actually. Where was it? It was definitely a book or a magazine. And there was a picture of Jimmy in bed, a hospital bed, with a nurse sitting next to him on the bed, sort of smiling, and they're both smiling for the camera. And I thought, well, what's that? When was that taken? What was that? And it had to be Jim Clark in a hospital in France the day after he got hit in the face by a bird. And there weren't a lot of marks, but there was enough damage to his eyesight at the time for him not to race. And Stefan Johansson hit a deer, didn't he, in the Austrian Grand Prix when he was driving for the McLaren, and that was a really big shunt. Really big. And then we got Bruno Senna hit the dog in Turkey. Oof, there have been some terrible things. Yeah, let's hope there are no more of those. For the point of view of certainly the wildlife, and obviously for the teams and the drivers. Paul Muscat says, will Stroll level up with Alonso by the end of the year? Well, I think if Lawrence Stroll has anything to do with it, he will. I think, as I keep saying, I can't imagine Lawrence Stroll's that happy with everything. Because his main thing about being in Formula One with Lance is that Lance is good enough to win the World Championship, win Grand Prix and to win the World Championship. And he's going to create a team to prove that. And he's going to have very good drivers in the other car as sort of benchmarks for Lance. And Vettel was a very good choice because he was at the back end of his career, and periodically Lance could out-qualify him and look quite good alongside this 4 times world champion, which was great. And then they thought Fernando would kind of be the same, I think. Yeah, right. And I think that's the problem. And they think, wow, what have we created here? And I think, Lance, he did okay, didn't he, in Barcelona? And Canada was a bit of a disappointment. He's never really gone that well in Canada. So we'll see what happens in Austria. A bit like Perez. It's difficult for Perez to be slow in Austria. I can't imagine Stroll's going to be that slow in Austria. And Fernando equally might find Austria a bit boring as a track, and you might not see. I wouldn't say the best from Fernando. All I'm saying is Fernando won't be able to do some of the things the magical things that he can do on other interesting circuits that he may not be able to do those in Austria because there aren't many places to do them. And then don't forget, Fernando made that mistake, didn't he, in qualifying in Barcelona. So we'll see. Stroll's got some difficult circuits coming up after Austria, and we'll see how it goes. Certainly Lawrence will be cracking the whip for sure. He'll be saying, I want to see my son up there. He's as good as Fernando, whatever, something along those lines. Tuiso says, do you have the telemetry for the race's lap 1? How did Perez get past so easily by Sainz in a straight line? Was the slipstream that powerful? At the exit, Perez seemed fine. Did it? I recall Perez coming out of that corner and not. He wasn't absolutely perfect in terms of the way he got the power down. I think unusual for Perez, but I'd need to look at it again. But I think Perez got it slightly. I think it was mid-corner that he wasn't quite where he wanted to be, and he was on the power a little bit late from memory. But yeah, no, it was a really interesting. It was an interesting bit of the race, wasn't it? Because no DRS, obviously, and then we were talking about toes. And I think Sainz, the Ferrari was pretty good, wasn't it, in the toe and in the straight line. Well, it was kind of okay. It couldn't do much with Alex Albon, that's for sure. But it was not bad. But yeah, you make an interesting point. I mean, actually thinking about it, the Red Bulls weren't that quick in a straight line in Canada. They were okay. They were definitely a little bit quicker than everything else. The Aston Martin was quicker than it's been relative to the Merc. But there was only about 3 or 4 in it between the Red Bull and the Mercedes, and Ferrari as well. So they were all very close in top speed in Canada, which which Max said afterwards, it wasn't going to be our greatest circuit. And I've been thinking about what he meant by that, because in theory, with great aero efficiency, why wouldn't everywhere, but particularly Canada, be a good circuit for them? And I guess it's because when you go to low downforce trim on the car, it's definitely changed the aero balance and the overall aero efficiency of what that can do relative to others. I think it brings it down in terms of its aero efficiency to the level of just about everybody else. They've still got a lot of other good things on the car, but I think in low downforce trim, it neutralized some of the advantages of Red Bull. And so it'll be interesting to see the next time they go to that, which may be Spa, more likely Monza, to see what Ferrari, what Adrian's come up with. That's probably what he's working on for the next 3 months, is the low downforce trim they need. Having said that, does he really need to work on it? Max still won Canada, and by Monza, you got to assume that it's all done and dusted. Not saying he's clinched it, but nobody else is going to do it. So does he need to spend a lot of time and money on that? He might, in terms of the 24 car, and that's something they need to build into the 24 car. It's been interesting. That's probably their line of development right now. So thanks for that question. Good question. Deva Priya Ghosh. Hi, Peter. Big fan. You've taught me to look at Formula One in a different angle. What's your thoughts on Michael Schumacher? Where would you rate him? Well, I've spoken quite a lot about Michael already. And in case you missed it, I think Michael was capable of putting together his own team, which he effectively did at Ferrari, with good people helping him, Ross Brawn, Jean Todt. But a lot of those mechanics from Benetton were Michael's guys, and a lot of what we saw going on was the Michael way of going motor racing. And then, having got all that in place, he worked the team very well in a genuinely humane way, and got to know all the key people, the mechanics, everybody that was important. He knew their name, he knew their background, he knew the name of the wife, and he could sympathize with them if they were having a bad moment in life or whatever it was. And he was just there. He was a good guy in a way that racing drivers normally are not. That was, for him, that was part of the racing life that he had to put in as the ultimate professional. And then he did the most amazing deal, really, again with Todd and Ross Brawn, which was, he saw quite clearly in 98 and 99 that the Bridgestone tyre on the McLaren was a quantum leap ahead of everything else. And I'm guessing at some point he said, we got to have Bridgestone tyres on the Ferrari, but we don't want to have them on the McLaren or any other opposition. They can go to Michelin or whatever. We want those Bridgestones. And they created a situation where Bridgestone were effectively exclusive to Michael Schumacher and Ferrari for the next 5 years, which is why I won so many races and championships. I mean, when you give yourself a tyre advantage like that, you've got all the pieces in place, as well as all the engineers, the facilities at Ferrari, and you drive as well as Michael. So he had all that ability to do that. And I still think, most of the credit for that Bridgestone deal should go to Michael, because it was a classic Machiavellian plot, if you like, of how do we get McLaren off Bridgestone? What we do is tell Bridgestone that we're going to give all our chassis information, all our vehicle dynamic situation to them to help them build better tyres, knowing full well that there's no way Ron Dennis would ever do that for fear that the information would get back to Ferrari. And so it's exactly what happened. They put out a statement saying, we've got this new contract with Bridgestone, and we're going to have a closer relationship with the tyre company than we've ever had before, and we're going to exchange all this information. And the next thing we knew, McLaren had signed with Michelin. Job done. 5 world championships coming up. That was what Michael Schumacher was all about, and really miss him. He did a brilliant job like that, and I don't think many drivers in the history of the sport had that sort of capability, that managerial, political savvy that Michael had. Yeah, as a race driver, occasionally he had a few glitches, as indeed did Ayrton Senna. And probably Michael fed off a few of the Ayrton Senna things. He always blamed football, didn't he? He said, they get away with it in football. Why can't I get away with it? But when he was behaving himself and he was just driving well, he was a joy to watch. He was right at the cusp of the of the really effective use of left foot braking against paddle shift, with paddle shift, and I think he perfected short corners in a way that nobody ever had before because of that. And we see Max and Lewis and Charles habitually doing that now, but a lot of that was first done by Michael in a way that Jim Clark, having to do manual downshifts and heel and towing, often with the clutch not working or whatever, it was much more of a drama in those days. But for Michael, it was just like vroom, like that, and it was incredible to watch at the time because we'd never seen that sort of thing before. Yeah, there you go. Kevin King says the bird was in Max's brake duct after the race. Wow. Well, there you go. So he would have had brake problems then, brake cooling. That's probably why, the margin was only 8.5 seconds. Wow. Thanks for that. Lucas Noxio. Yeah, there was an image going Twitter and Instagram of the bird being pulled out of Max's car. Poor bird. Next to the brake duct. Okay. Poor bird. Yeah, very poor bird. Nano Anon. But Russell was behind him, so debris must have been static at that point in the next lap. So that's weird. Yeah. No, it was the next lap going through it, wasn't it? Yeah, for sure. Boogie Boy 666. A bird led about 50 laps of the Canadian Grand Prix. Yeah. Anybody got the latest count on how many laps Bernd Mailander's led in the safety car? More than the 1973 safety car, the Porsche 914 led, because it actually didn't lead any because it was in front of the wrong car. I don't think, as I said at the time, I don't think Formula One should be blowing too loud a trumpet about that anniversary, because the 73 yellow Porsche 914 was a disaster from beginning to end. Rafael Solano. Is the 9-second difference between Max and Canada more about the track or the upgrades to Aston Martin and Mercedes? Well, it could be about the bird, actually. Could be about brake temperatures not being that easy to manage. Canada very tough on brakes. I don't think Max was pushing that car very hard. Canada's very tough on fuel consumption and also on brakes. And he did. It wasn't a race where he was having had the safety car intervention and the Aston Martin being pretty good in terms of balance and grip and being not as slow on the straight as it has been. That wasn't a race where he was going to start pushing the car to try to get away. It was a race where he wanted to control it within 2 or 3 tenths and per lap. And I was doing measuring that gap actually, and because when they came out after the pit stop, and then when Fernando got up to P2, you thought crossed the mindset, let's watch how Max wins this race now. How does he do it? Does he suddenly put in 3 laps absolutely on the limit and pull away? What does he do? No, he doesn't. He does 17.0. These are his lap times from, say, laps 29, when he said he had no grip, right? 17.0, 16.8, 17.0, 16.8, 16.9, 16.8, 17.0, 17.2, 17.0, 17.0 in. And wow, you think no grip. It's all those laps are within 2 tenths of one another. And yeah, Fernando was pretty consistent as well. He at the time he was third, 17.4, 17.7, 17.1, 17.2, 17.5. Not quite as consistent. And Lewis 17.0, about the same. Did the odds 17.6. So Max won that race through unbelievable consistency over a long period of time. And every time, he would never vary more than 2 or 3 tenths, less than that, 2 tenths a lap. But Fernando would sometimes do a 15.8, a 16.1, a 16.2, and then he suddenly did a high 16. Something happened. And so that's where it came from. It was just Max. When you see a driver that consistent, to me it means he's driving within all the parameters of the envelope, and he's just massaging the car, keeping everything as neat and calm as he possibly can. And he wasn't extending it. To my mind, he wasn't extending that car. So I think that's what that 8.5 seconds was all about. And it's not to say that had he pulled out a 14-second lead, maybe the brakes would have overheated. Maybe he would have had to have done a bit of lift and coasting towards the end for fuel. Who knows? And that's why he was able to manage the race as well as he did. It's a very, very impressive drive. So here we go. Miami was annihilation, though. Yeah, that's okay. Yilmaz, what is the worst decision made by FIA before the season, all time, for you? The FIA or the rules regulation? FIA. Well, I think it was Bernie nudging the FIA at the time into agreeing to strip the South African Grand Prix of points after the race had been won by Carlos Reutemann, and then Bernie's team winning the championship by 1 point as a result. I think that's the worst decision, actually, because it was a championship that was involved in all that. So, yeah, I got to say it was that. In terms of the teams, I think it was probably Indianapolis 2005. All the Michelin teams just pulling out of the race and not allowing any compromise to be reached for the American fans, and having a chicane put in after practice, something to enable that race to have happened as a proper race. I think that was a disgrace as well, particularly as they left hung Michelin out to dry in the United States, a huge market for them. Michelin, an incredible company that has supported Formula One a lot over the years, going right back to the 20s. So I think, those two stick in my mind as two horrendous things. But plenty of others. I think banning of spare cars was a stupid thing. We should have spare cars still. I think they're a very important part of Formula One, and having spare cars adds to the show. And the incremental cost is nothing like as big as some of the other big incremental costs we've been talking about on this show tonight, including the way the calendar's structured, including all the motorhomes in the paddock. So I think they should bring back spare cars. So yeah, it's a good question. I'm sure a lot more will spring to mind after the show, or maybe going into the next show. So it's a good one. Thank you very much, Octay. Herbert Williams, Birdbeak. Curb Strike, Birdbeak. Okay. Sunny Chandru Mabubani again. Why was overtaking rather difficult this time in Canada, but relatively easy last time in Spain? Well, I think it's just the way the race went, wasn't it? I think with the relatively early safety car, most people came in on that, and then they were all on new tyres. So the strategies were pretty similar, whereas in Spain you did have some differences in strategy, except for the Williams, which was really quick in a straight line and nobody could get past it. So it's probably not as simple as that. And it's a pretty good question. I suppose also you got to say the lower downforce setups they're running make the DRS is less DRS effect, probably, with the lower downforce. I haven't really thought this one through, but I'm just sort of... Dexter, come on, you're going to knock that light over in a second. Stop it. Go to sleep now. Come on. I think it could be that. Need to get Scarbs on the show to ask him that one. But if there's less wing, less downforce at the rear, it stands to reason, I guess, that when the DRS effect is going to be less as well. Is that right? I think it's right. So it's probably that. They're all running smaller rear wings, less downforce at the rear, quicker through the air. Yeah. Han Hiseldum. When Charles Leclerc expressed wanting to go to softs in qualifying, his engineer replied, "But Verstappen stayed out." Did he? Yeah, I didn't hear that bit, but I mean, if he did, it doesn't surprise me. Why should they be even looking at what Verstappen does in terms of strategy? They should be looking in terms of driving, maybe, in terms of getting temperature into the tyres. But as I say, they should be doing their own thing and coming to the conclusion, which was logical, which is that he should have been out on slicks. And you could argue, I suppose, I'm just going to have another go at this chair, bring it up. There you go. You could argue that Charles should have said, "I want to be on slicks. I don't care what you guys say. Put the slicks on now." But I just get the feeling he's had enough of trying to fight the system and just goes along with the flow within reason. Obviously, he has his inputs, but in terms of just completely overruling everybody, I guess he's kind of given up on that. It looks that way because it was so logical for him to go out on slicks in Q2. Why didn't he do that? And then to have this discussion about, expressed it wants softs in qualifying. Wasn't even correct because Verstappen didn't stay out. He did one run and then came straight in. So Ferrari, if that's the case, Ferrari didn't even know what was going on. Another great question from my 2 cents. Thank you for sharing your insights. Formula One weekends wouldn't feel complete without your astute analysis, be it qualifying, sprint or race. How about dedicated segments where you share past Formula One stories, events, unique experiences? Well, that's very kind. Yeah, I could do that. You mean do a live stream which is only sharing the past and a live stream that's only looking ahead? I don't know. I guess I'm a little bit nervous about talking too much about the past or being seen to be talking too much about it, because people in Formula One love to say, oh yeah, old fogey doesn't, let's talk about the here and now. And I do love the here and now, and I try to stay as well informed as I can about the here and now, and indeed what's beyond the here and now, the future, the young guys out there, the really young guys. But I love the past. I love to put it all together, and I feel very privileged that I've got a platform that comes from YouTube that allows me to do this and get out there in front of very good people like yourself to talk about it, because 5 years ago, 10 years ago for sure, all I could have done would have been writing books and magazine articles and stuff, and I suppose that that's okay, that's great, but I much prefer to do this because it's much more of the moment, and I can talk in a way that I can't write really. So that's it's a great thing. Thank you very much indeed, again, for that comment. Very kind. Mr. Nanoplankton, why is the spread between Alonso and Lance so great, while previously Lance was close to his teammate? Well, as I said before, after Monaco, watching them and knowing Fernando the way he drives, I would say that car is pretty pointy. He just needs a front end, Fernando. He just does this, and then he's just got this amazing foot and hand work where he just gets the car settled, then he's off. But he needs that in the same way Ayrton needed the blipping throttle mid-corner. It's just something Fernando's always done. And I suspect that with Vettel, Vettel always wanted a good rear end more than the front, and because that's his rotation when he's V'ing the corner. And Lance could live with that and drove very well with that, with slide understeer if you like. And I think the problem is with this car is that the quick way to drive it obviously is the Fernando way, and what Lance needs is more a little bit understeer in the front just to feel what the front's doing, and then he can do his thing. And he's a little bit short cornerish, he's a little bit supple, he's not bad. I mean, don't write off Lance Stroll. He's certainly, I would say, shorter corner than Fernando. But I don't think he can do very much with the car as is. And I think they tried to do something. I think they've tried to do it in Barcelona. I don't think it worked very well in Canada because of the lower downforce. But it'll be interesting to see how they go in Austria. A, because it's not that difficult. And B, because I think it'll be easier to dial in a bit of understeer and make the car less pointy for Stroll in Austria than they could in Canada. That's what I think. I may be wrong, but knowing Fernando and the way he's always driven, I can imagine that's what the issue is. So here we go. It's been another jump of the whole thing here. Where do we go? Sorry, I'm just going back. The whole thing just jumped to the bottom then. I want to go back to where I was, because I want to try and take it all in order in the last 7 minutes that we have. I hope there's somebody. I really hope there's nobody there who's always coming in late and I never get around to answering their question. If they are, very sincere apologies. Please keep going. But I can't go forever. 2 hours is about my limit, I think, in terms of Dexter here needing to go for a walk, etc. So where are we now? I can see a very good question there. It's okay, here we go. David Langley. Stephen, oh wow, there's just so many questions. There was one mega question there. What was Mario Andretti's style like? I just got to answer that. Mario was painted to the road, man. He was so. I don't want to use the word smooth, but if you're going to use that with anybody, you'd use it with Mario Andretti. I mean, you know the folklore about Mario, which is not folklore; it's real. I mean, he can go down the pit lane at Indy 500, and he can have sort of half a degree of stagger, and he can feel it even before he's accelerated the car. He was that sensitive. He brought stagger into Formula One. In other words, different diameter tyres on different sides of the car based on what corners he wanted to feature on the lap, the most important corners. So he did all that. But by the same time, he could hold a slide. Dexter, the light's about to clap. Stop it. Don't do that. He could hold a slide. I mean, this guy started in midgets and sprints. What do you think? And this guy was on the dirt doing this. And he could do that. And he did that. And he was driving long before slicks were invented. And he could do anything. He could do anything. By the time Ronnie was alongside him, Ronnie would be more oversteery and probably would take a little bit more risk. But Mario would hold his own with Ronnie. I mean, I'm not gonna let anybody talk me down when I say Mario could hold his own with Ronnie. He could, and he was incredibly quick. Yeah, he wasn't maybe lap for lap that year as good as Ronnie, but as quick as Ronnie. But he was as good as Ronnie, better in many ways, and ultimate polished pro, but absolutely in his element, driving the Lotus 77 in the wet at Fuji. Setting fastest lap, brilliant drive. I mean, phenomenal in the wet, incredible when he got downforce and how he made the 79 work. And to be on the pole in your first ever Grand Prix, Lotus 49, Watkins Glen, 1968, and he was on the pole, and he'd never been to the circuit before. He was American. It was the US Grand Prix. It was Watkins Glen. Everybody thought, Mario, local hero. He'd never been to the Glen before. What he had done is a lot of Firestone testing in USAC, IndyCar, as we call it today. And in that, he learnt that the longer you can run a groove tyre, the more chance it'll become a slick. And so he just stayed out on one set of tyres and wore and more and more of the grooves down and got the pole. Got to hand it to him. I mean, the guy was, and Colin just loved him. He was the bond between Colin and Mario was the closest thing you're ever going to get to Colin and Jim Clark. And Mario could feel the slightest change to the car. In some ways, you could argue that was probably a bit annoying for some engineers, but he was superb. Loved him. Loved him as a racing driver. Still love him as a person. One of my heroes, one of my all-time heroes. You know who also has a hero called Mario Andretti? Jody Eddington of AlphaTauri, chief designer. I asked him one day, "Who's your hero?" Mario Andretti. Never met him. I'd love to meet him. It's cool, isn't it? I don't know. I'm going back and back, right up here. I still can't get to where I was. Anyway, I've got to nearly finish now anyway. Well, I'm just trying to do two more. I'm going to go back to where I was. Well, I can't believe how far I'm having to go. Thank you so much, everybody, for all your questions. I feel absurdly guilty and slack not dealing with them all. But I would literally be here till 4 a.m, I think, if I did. I'm still, I'm not. Have I answered this one? I don't think I have. F1 Hensel, green question. Thank you very much for that. Very kind. Still going up and up and up. Leave it to me. Yeah, well, I don't think there's a bird in your car. It's an impact on performance. Yes, it does. Hello. Hey, Peter. I like your videos. Thank you for your stories. That's Sasa Balta. Stephen, think you're reading into it too much, Peter Windsor. I think there is something lost in translation. All it seemed to mean was, Charles, don't waste time defending science. I'm not quite sure what that means. I think science has driven better this year than he's ever driven in his life. That's my opinion. I don't think he's ever going to be as good as Charles Leclerc, but I think he's nearer to Charles right now than he's ever been, because I don't think Charles is driving at his best, and I think Sainz has never been better. That's all I'm saying. So Josh Mills says, oval racing, different discipline. Don't think so. Jim Clark did ovals. He won the Indy 500 and Formula One in the same year. Excuse me. Xavier Mares, hi Peter, how could debriefs be part of the Formula One broadcast experience for viewers at home? Wouldn't that reveal team secrets? Well, I would like to think that the broadcasters stroke directors are clever enough to know what is appropriate to put out and what isn't. Do you think that all the stuff that goes out on Netflix at the moment is absolutely natural and real? Of course the teams need to be part of it, but that's the show we need to put on. It's not difficult. I could do it like that. I could go to each team and say, right, this is what you need to talk about for 10 minutes. It's going to look great. It's not going to give away any secrets. We'll get on with it now. And it wouldn't be difficult to do. Very easy. It's just that everybody's paranoid. They don't know what to talk about. They don't know what should be secret and what shouldn't. I mean, oh, we got an upgrade. Better not tell everybody what it is. You know, what's that all about? Everybody knows what it is when it's in the pit lane. And so it goes on. Formula One teams are paranoid about secrecy because they think it's a cool thing, not because they actually need to be paranoid about secrecy. That's the point. And Formula One needs to capture that. And if it is secret, that's good TV as well. You know, you put a blank over it, whatever, you know. But use your imagination. Not difficult. Same with GoPros in the road cars when they're driving to and from the circuit. We should have all that footage. They know they're being filmed. Let them, you know, say what they want to say. So that's my view. And that's what they should be doing. And we should be going into board meetings with Zach Brown, knowing that he's got a pitch to this company, and the next day that company's going to be listening to Toto Wolff, and we should be following them in and knowing how the pitch goes and looking at the proposals. How can that be bad? How can that be bad for motor racing, for people to learn how to do it? It's great TV. Of course Zach can act it a little bit, and of course Toto can act it a bit, but it's good stuff. If it's all good for the show, why not do it? It's all there. It doesn't cost a lot of money to put it all together. I mean, the production does, but I'm talking about what we have already is there. We don't need to create anything. Geordie Levels. Hi, Peter. If you put Max in an Aston this year, would he have won a race? Well, depends when you put him in the Aston. I was trying to think, where would he... No, I don't think he... Well, it depends who was in the Red Bull as well, of course, doesn't it? You know, if Lewis is in the Red Bull, I don't think he would have, no. And if Charles was in the Red Bull, I don't think he would have. If Carlos Sainz was in the Red Bull alongside Perez, probably Max in an Aston would have won, yeah. If Fernando was in a Red Bull, no way. I don't think Max would have won a race in an Aston. Just depends who's in the Red Bull, really. But again, I don't want to, you know, I think it's an important point. I don't think you should imagine that a driver just can climb into a car and be super quick over a season. He'll be super quick, but not over a season in the way Max is dominating this year, because he's dominating it not only on the track, he's dominating it with his relationship with Adrian Newey, and that's something that builds up over a 2 or 3 year period. They're the building blocks that Adrian has in order to develop next year's car. And if I'm only guessing, but if the next thing Adrian's thinking is, right, we need to make the car quicker in lower downforce setup, the building blocks that Max gave him from Canada will be much more accurate than the building blocks given to any engineer by any other driver, because Max was driving perfectly within the envelope of what that car could do. Huey, H-U-I. Peter, people are often seething. FIA refuses to rule change to nerf Red Bull, but this could just turn other teams' progress back to zero and give Newey new code to crack and dominate. Any thoughts? Well, if people are angry that the FIA are doing nothing about it, then they completely have no idea what Formula One's all about. It's about trying to win every Grand Prix and every championship and to produce the best car. And if a team has done that, you don't expect the governing body to then change all the rules so they don't win. Well, if you do, you shouldn't be watching Formula One. And so that's my thought. And obviously, if you're trying to encourage the big manufacturers to come into Formula One in a way that Liberty are, you don't want to show that you're going to change the rules every 5 minutes according to who's winning races. Why would you do that? Any more than you'd want to give them a standard gearbox all of a sudden. Darth Lord Raven again. That's Flovis. I'm always wondering how they can clean that part of the car. Flovis, yeah. F1 Hensel, just want to thank you for great content over the decades. Really enjoy the details, information. Thank you very much indeed. We appreciate it. Ninja Fish, if a billionaire's looking for a project, a resurfacing of Charter Hall near Duns would be nice. Yeah, I've spent many a freezing early evening in Charter Hall, particularly with Ian Scott Watson, actually, talking about the old days with Jimmy. Crimond, Charter Hall, Rest and Be Thankful Hill Climb, all these names that we just read about, but they were Jim Clark's fabric, his early racetracks and hill climbs, and he did a lot of rallying too. Yeah, Charter Hall, love it. And the Blackadder River is there as well, isn't it? I always thought that was quite interesting. Right, Nick, the engineer lie. 400,000 is 0.03% of budgetary limit, irrelevant number. That's talking about the budget cap thing, yeah. Yeah, there's a bit of inter-communication going on there. Is the Mercedes an Aston Martin clone, or is the Aston Martin a Red Bull clone? No, I don't think so. I think there's enough there to say that they are kind of Mercedes, Aston Martin and Red Bull. I think Mercedes is a bit of a, dog's dinner is the wrong word completely, isn't it, Dexter? It's a mix, I think. It's certainly not an Aston clone in my view. It's a mix. It's still got some of the stuff from the original car. Any thoughts on the Renault operation? Seems like throwing money away. Have done nothing with the Alpine road car and brand really. A Formula One team has been years on hiatus. No star driver. Terrible management. Well, I wouldn't say terrible management. I think Otmar's doing a pretty good job. Difficult hierarchy probably. The Renault. We've had quite a lot of aggressive comments from the really top management saying they expect more, which is a bit ludicrous. I think reliability seems to be their issue at the moment, doesn't it? They're very fragile, they seem, which is very odd for a team that's basically Benetton, which used to be rock solid. So the reliability is the biggest thing. They're certainly quick. Got to say they're probably quicker if they're up and running and going well all 3 days. They're quicker than McLaren, quicker than where are they actually? It's slower than Merck now, but not. They'd be number 4, I would have thought, in terms of pace. I don't know. I quite rate Ocon and Gasly. I think they're very good. I wouldn't have said either of them are superstars, but I think Ocon is looking really good, isn't he? Every time he goes out now, he does something pretty good. Pretty consistent. Gasly seems to attract drama wherever he goes, but when he's drama free, looks pretty good. So I wouldn't be anything like as tough with them. The biggest problem, Alpine, I'm talking about the Alpine brand. Gordon Murray's bought one, hasn't he? So there's one out there. No, there's plenty, I'm sure. It's a nice looking car. The problem they've got, potentially, I suspect, is that with this whole Dexter, the light's going to go in a second. You'll see the light. He's going to knock this over. What are you doing there? To finish the point I'm going to make, in 26 you've got Audi coming in, Honda coming back, Ford coming in various forms, and they're coming into this new Formula One which is 50% electrified. And Alpine, as far as I know, don't have any electrification plans at all, do they? So how is that Alpine road car going to work with the Formula One PR platform? That's potentially something to think about, I guess, in terms of the way they've branded that team. Maybe they'll go back to Renault, I don't know. They could easily do that. They've chosen to go the Alpine route for the moment, but they might well go back to Renault, I guess. So that's that. Dhruv Patel, hey Peter, this is going to be the last question, I'm afraid. Have you driven a Formula One car? What car do you drive? Oh, yeah, I've driven several Formula One. I've been very lucky. I've driven several Formula One cars. I've driven a Lotus 49. I've driven a Lotus 21, a Lotus 18. I like Lotuses. I've driven a Ferrari Tasman car, 2.4 litre V6 Tasman car. I've driven a Toyota V10 Formula One car, the Renault Turbo Formula One car. So quite a few Formula One cars, actually. Probably one or two I've missed. And I actually drive a Spanish car. Living in Spain now, I thought I'll get a Spanish car. Police might like me a bit more if I do. So I've got a Cupra. What's it called? Sports Tourer, I think it's called. So it's a estate car, but it's a sort of sport Cupra thing. A really good car, actually. I love it. Like, there's quite a lot of VW stuff on there, and it's really good electronics. I love that car. It's a great car. And I can get Dexter in the back, golf clubs. We can go shopping at Mercadona, and I can pick Jack up from school with all his clobber. No problem at all. And I drove it to Monaco from here, from Murcia, and it was just a joy to drive. Loved it. Absolutely brilliant. It brought, really enjoyed driving in Europe and driving that car. Just sit back and relax. Really good. Anyway, thanks for that question. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you to Jetstream and Pitbox. Support this channel. And I'll be back again with another one. But I am going to start working on fairly soon, sooner rather than later. I'm not going to procrastinate too much longer. A video about how Max creates his short corners. And that'll go out as a video. And then I'm going to start doing short videos comparing each driver in each team and how they go into Rascasse and giving an insight onto what their style is in terms of long or short corners and how they work things. Obviously I don't have all the information, but hopefully it'll work out quite well and be quite interesting. So thank you very much. And there's one question there. Hulk lost P2 because he was too fast during a red flag. Yeah, that was terrible, wasn't it? Hulkenberg, a bit like Gasly. I mean, every time something good happens, something bad happens. Ridiculous. Hulkenberg P2, what a great performance that was too. We didn't talk about that at all, I'd like to say. Nico Hulkenberg, I'm a big fan. So many good questions here that I haven't time to ask. It's so annoying. So sorry about that. I was just about to say goodbye. There's one about Villeneuve here. Villeneuve never won a wet race against Schumacher. Kimi never won a race in a Jordan tier car. Villeneuve never won a wet race against... Oh, you're talking about Jacques, obviously. Yeah, okay. Good. Thank you very much indeed, again, for watching. And see you all very soon. I'll do another one fairly soon. I don't know if I'll do another live stream for Austria, but I'll certainly get some video out, hopefully, by then. So thanks for watching, and see you soon. Stay safe.